Hello, friends. Welcome to Type 56, the story of China's army. I'm Jason Clower, and this is part two of our story about the Battle of Bridge 4 in the Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979. If you haven't seen part one yet, pause for a moment and go back to that. Remember, friends, all of this was happening at night, so everything was extra messy. The Chinese now had some tanks and guns on their side of the bridge, and they've got infantry still stuck on the far side of the bridge. Awkward transition to high quality visual aid. Friends, here's a fresh look at the top secret battle map that I stole from General Staff Department headquarters. Here is Bridge 4. This, by the way, is a traditional PLA pointer. It looks like a toothbrush for infants, but it's not. Here we can see the Bridge 4 is completely dominated by Vietnamese heavy weapons on these high points. And a very lonely Company 5 and Company 7 are cowering over here, or rather, I should say, making a brave stand on a hill that they've seized, but they are dominated by this fire. Now, there's also a Vietnamese tank platoon trying to get across the bridge. Thankfully, though, Chinese forces are piling up on the other side of the bridge, just desperately trying to make a breakthrough. We've got 2nd Battalion, who are pinned down as before, but at least now they've been joined by the divisional tank element of T-54s, who are going to try to muscle their way across the bridge, and also this very formidable element of PLA anti-aircraft cannon, or what are called Gao Pao. And coming along and back is 3rd Battalion, and the PLA just has to be very careful now because they are very bunched up under virtually limitless heavy firepower coming from over here. Jarring transition back to story. They're losing momentum and they can't get across the bridge because now the exit from the bridge on the Vietnamese side is blocked by a burning Vietnamese tank that was knocked out by a T-54 as it began trying to drive over the bridge. So one of the Chinese tanks has to drive over there and slowly ram the burning hulk aside and open the road back up. But in the meantime, the 3 surviving Vietnamese tanks are zooming away so that they can cause trouble to the Chinese relief column somewhere else. They've decided not to just stand there and slug it out stupidly with the Chinese T-54s. So they've left the area of the bridge and snuck away in the darkness to go down by the riverbank to find a place where they can shoot up Chinese reinforcements who are bunched up on the other side of the river, waiting to cross the bridge, which is still closed. That is no good. So now it's a priority to open the road on the other side of the bridge. And that means getting the Chinese T-54s across. And that means that somebody has to keep them safe from these marauding Vietnamese T-34s who are still creeping around out there somewhere in the darkness, just dying to get a nice juicy flank or rear end shot on a Chinese tank. No, no, no. So now there's a special tank hunter infantry squad that's being sent across. They go across the bridge riding on the hull, Russian style, of a Chinese tank. And their assignment over there is work together with the tanks, knock out anti-tank positions, and then help them sniff out the roaming Vietnamese tanks in the darkness. That must have been a bone-chilling game of hide and seek RPG tag. First, they quickly knocked out 2 anti-tank positions lurking in the darkness. Then they jump back on the hull of their tank to continue hunting, and one of the anti-tank positions comes back to life, and it machine guns the hull of the tank, and ping, 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 kills all the infantry riding on top. So there goes that tank hunter team. In addition, now at the worst possible moment, on top of all the other disorder, the lights go out. That is, it starts pouring rain extra hard in the middle of the night in the jungle highlands. So where before, at least there were flares, and some burning tank corpses to see by. Now, the only illumination left on this psychotic chessboard are muzzle flashers and tracers, which are all the same color. And the rain droplets themselves are taking away even more visibility because there's only so far that you can see through a falling curtain of water. So now there's a bit of a standoff because heavy Chinese reinforcements have arrived at the bridge, but it's not like the Vietnamese are standing back and giving them a free ticket to cross the bridge, bullet free. The Vietnamese still have heavy weapons galore up on all the high ground, surrounding the other side of the bridge. They're continuing to dump fire on the poor remnants of 5th and 7th companies who are trapped over there with them on the wrong side of the bridge. And they've got plenty of range to hose anything that they want on the Chinese side of the bridge. The best that can be said for the Chinese position now is that at least they've got their own anti-aircraft guns on the ground to engage in what must have been a suicidal point-blank knife fight with the Vietnamese anti-aircraft guns up on the heights. And the Chinese have their own tanks to drive the Vietnamese tanks into hiding. The Chinese have lost their tank hunter teams, and all that they know about those Vietnamese tanks is that there are 3 survivors driving around somewhere in the dark on the Vietnamese side of the bridge, just waiting for something Chinese and juicy to come across so they can light it up. And furthermore, now that it's darker than ever under all the rain, the Vietnamese defenders have one further advantage, which is they're playing on their home field. All those heavy weapons emplacements up on the heights are pre-registered exactly onto that bridge that they're defending. They don't even have to be able to see the breaches of their own guns to sweep that bridge with fire. They already have their range cards and their little aiming stakes. They could just grope around in the dark and shoot completely by feel, and they'll still be able to soak that bridge top with bullets and shrapnel, which is making it hell for the Chinese infantry reinforcements to trickle across that bridge, desperate to get to their friends from 5th and 7th Company who are pinned down on the other side. That's how it was that our Deputy Corps Commander, Liu Guangtong, had what might be the strangest, most high-ranking random battlefield encounter that I've ever heard of in PLA history. You'll remember that he was there personally directing anti-aircraft cannon shooting at Vietnamese anti-aircraft cannon, which sounds a lot like a pistol duel in a phone booth. And as he's walking among these anti-aircraft positions on the Chinese side of the bridge, he looks down at the embankment at the foot of the entrance to the bridge. And he sees a PLA heavy machine gun crew of 2 guys working a heavy MG there. And he thinks, wait, I recognize them. He squinted, and sure enough, the 2 gunners were actually a pair of lieutenant colonels, the 3rd Battalion's own CO and political officer, who are there busy. The CO is behind the gun, the PO is feeding belts into it, and the deputy commander walks up and actually kicks one of them in the butt with his toe and goes, "What the hell are you 2 doing? Where's your battalion?" And they yell, "We're leading from the front, sir. The battalion is about to cross and we're covering their advance." Sure enough, as they're doing this, 3rd Battalion is shimmying as best they can across that dangerous bridge top, and that the deputy commander watches as the CO and the PO grab the gun and the tripod, and then they hustle along across the bridge, tagging along to their own battalion's rear guard. This is cool, but it does bring up an issue about PLA leadership. We've touched on this before, and we're going to have to talk about it again. Namely, in the Sino-Vietnamese War, the PLA lost a ton of junior leaders. In fact, they lost a lot of officers at all ranks, and you can kind of see why. Even the field grade officers thought and acted a lot like company level officers. Now, granted, I, as a professor from my literal book lined room, don't have quite as much experience leading battalions as these two fellows do, so far be it from me to second guess them. But I can imagine a school of thought that would say, maybe the top two men in a battalion should be handling bigger picture stuff, like maintaining awareness of their battalion's position in the overall field of battle, instead of engaging in a machine gun duel. Well, the two sides remained in this stalemate for a couple hours more until a pair of factors changed the balance of power. One was that the Chinese tanks got across the river, and now they elevated their guns and they started lighting up the anti-aircraft batteries that were providing the lion's share of the Vietnamese firepower. Once those anti-aircraft guns weren't plastering the bridge anymore, it was a lot safer for the Chinese to use the bridge. The other big shift in the tide of battle was that after almost 6 hours of night fighting, the sun was beginning to rise. That meant that the two surviving Vietnamese T-34 tanks who were marauding on their side of the river couldn't hide anymore from the Chinese T-54s who had come over the bridge in search of them. The Vietnamese tanks now had to withdraw. And as they did, they actually got chased now by Chinese RPG teams from 3rd Battalion who had come over and they were feeling saucy. One of the Vietnamese T-34s got an RPG up its rear that perforated the bulkhead that separated its engine compartment from its crew compartment. That thing started to brew up, and as soon as the crew popped the hatch, they got a hail of hand grenades by follow-on infantry. The other Vietnamese tank also got disabled. Their crew was luckier and they survived to be captured alive. Either way, as the sun rose and illuminated the battlefield, it showed a carnage that was incredible, even by the standards of this war, where the Chinese managed to lose about 26,000 men, about half of US casualties in Vietnam, only instead of being spread out over 10 years, it was packed into a month. The butchery of this battle was so appalling that even though the PLA actually had a war photographer embedded with the 446th that day who took copious photographs, none of them survived. They were all buried because they were entirely too grisly for the story that the PLA wanted to tell. As the sun got higher and higher over this gruesome scene, the battle wasn't over, but the conclusion started to become clear. The Chinese had bought that side of the bridge. It would have been easier and less costly if somebody had just read the map right from the beginning, but now they were the victors, at least in the sense that they had bridge number 4. Was it a Pyrrhic victory? Well, that depends on your assessment of the war as a whole. In the West, that war is always viewed as a debacle. In China, views are more nuanced. You're more likely to find Chinese commentators who will say, yes, the butcher's bill was terrific, but Deng Xiaoping achieved his political objectives. When the battle was over and the mopping up was finished, and the survivors began to feel giddy relief that they had dodged a bullet once again and started to share their stories of the battle, a group of soldiers on a truck were heard to laugh by their regimental commander, Cao Tonglian, the commander of the 446th, who rode to the rescue with his anti-aircraft guns and guided them in a suicidal-looking duel with the Vietnamese aircraft guns. He heard them laugh, and he walked up to the truck, and the usually paternal Colonel Cao looked up at them with slitty eyes and a mouth set like granite. And he said to these soldiers, "What are you laughing at? This isn't the county fair. Shut your fucking mouth." Well, the soldiers straightened right up and they watched their commanding officer wander away, and they felt pierced. Their own company political officer saw them looking shocked, hurt, guilty, and he walked up to them and he quietly said, "It's okay. He's hurting right now. He just found out that he lost his son." The soldiers in the truck said, I didn't even know he had a son in the army. Was he down here in Vietnam? And the political officer said, yeah, he's lying right over there. The political officer pointed to where the first Chinese tank had come across the bridge with the 5 tank hunters on top of it, the guys with RPGs who were going to help them winkle out the tank traps and the enemy RPG positions and those darned Vietnamese T-34s. The men riding on the hull of the tank who thought that they had dispatched one anti-tank position only to jump back on the hull of their tank and then get shot right off it. Turned out the assistant squad leader of that tank hunter infantry group was Cao Hui, the son of the regimental commander, and that one of the last people who saw them was Colonel Cao himself as that tank moved across the bridge. And the last anyone saw of young Cao Hui alive was him meeting eyes with his dad's bodyguards and waving to them. In many ways, friends, this Battle of Bridge 4 was kind of a paradigmatic example of a Chinese victory in the Sino-Vietnamese War, kind of a microcosm of the whole campaign. It was Chinese tactical victory. When the fighting ended, the Chinese were left in possession of the field. They were also left with a number of bodies and casualties that nobody had really expected back home. Sure, people knew that the PLA was going to get its nose bloodied because it had been out of the fighting business for a long time since the Cultural Revolution. People were expecting a bloody nose. They were not expecting a curb stomping. And yes, the Chinese forces pulled through on grit and an increasingly frank reliance on heavy combined arms. And yes, they snatched a victory of a sort from the jaws of defeat, but this victory came on the heels of, and even because of, a simple blunder in staff work. Friends, I'm considering doing something kind of new and doing a follow-on epilogue episode about exactly how that intelligence failure occurred. This would involve really getting into the weeds of staff work and PLA protocol, so I don't know if it's really to people's taste, but if that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments, and I could do one. Friends, if you like this sort of content, please like and subscribe. You might even visit our Patreon page, but this course remains free to all the world's workers, soldiers and peasants, riflemen and light infantry, even the tank crews. I remain Jason Clower, and I cannot wait to talk to you again.